Hi, I'm Karen, and this is the Mental Health Hope You're Not Alone podcast. This space is all about breaking the stigma of mental health, where we'll share personal stories, helpful online resources, and meaningful insights, all with one goal in mind, to remind you that you are not alone in your mental health journey. Hello, hopefuls. Welcome to Mental Health Hope You're Not Alone podcast. And I am really excited about this episode this week. It is something that has been an epiphany for me over the last couple of weeks. And that is why I wanted to do this as an episode, because I wanted to share my experience and hoping that maybe you might benefit from this as well. And so let me give you a little bit of a background. So about a couple weeks ago, I was having a conversation with my career coach, and he is incredible, by the way. I absolutely love working with him. He's very knowledgeable and can put things into perspective for me that I would not see otherwise. And it's just a really good relationship, and he knows everything about me. And so because of that, my conversation with him and my counselor very much overlap, because my anxiety has a lot to do with my work. And so quite often I would be talking with him about certain topics or questions that I have. And sometimes those answers or topics that we'll talk about, I will discuss with my counselor, as they're very much relevant in the conversations that I'm having with my counselor. This conversation that I had with my career coach a couple of weeks ago, and let me get out my little notebook here that I take notes on. He was talking about things within my life that he would dot over things that were happening or had happened in my life. And it was real interesting to hear his perspective on that, because what he mentioned was that I've been to know everybody has, so that really isn't story here. But he's talking about that things that bring me joy. So like relationships, not necessarily friendships, because I do have friends, and my friends have hurt me, but more so relationship and those connections. And those connections have really hurt me. And so he mentioned that in order for me to find a safe place, that I have it's been my reaction to be inside. And so one question that we talked about was, am I inside because I'm hurt so much? And what that means is that I don't leave my house very often. And thinking that because the outside world and what has gone on with things out there that have hurt me, that I have retreated to the inside of my house. And then that conversation I ended up having with my counselor, because I was telling her about this discovery or this topic that we were talking about. And her response was avoidance. And I had never put all of that together, thought about things. To me, I was protecting myself from the outside, and I was protecting my heart from getting hurt again or being broken. And with respect to relationships in particular, which is one of the things that my counselor and I talked about, is that she thought I was avoiding relationships, like dating somebody, and I'm not. I am just not actively looking. I have no desire to be in a relationship. I haven't dated somebody in over 10 years. And so I'm not avoiding it necessarily in the terms that she was thinking, but I'm also not actively looking. I've been on the apps and I've done the websites and things, and that's how I actually met my ex-husband. And we divorced in 2011, and it just broke me into a million pieces. And because of that, it took me a long time, about 3 years or so, to feel like I was ready to get back out and start dating. And then I dated somebody in 2014, and while that relationship, I don't know if I want to use the word volatile, but it was just not a good relationship. He and I got along really well, and we thought very similarly, but there were other things that were going on in his life that just did not work with our relationship. And so that relationship ended in 2015, and I was heartbroken. I was upset. Probably not to the extent that I was when I was married, but I'm still upset. And since then, I was just kind of, you know what? I'm done with this. I'm done getting my heart broken. I'm done being in relationships, and I have not dated anyone seriously since then. And so that was her thinking, that she thought I was avoiding relationships. But the reality of it is that I'm just not actively looking. But that kind of led us down the topic of avoidance. And what she mentioned was like relationships, possibly going outside, things that are going on with work. The more and more that my anxiety increased, the smaller my world got. And that is really where the epiphany happened, because I just did not ever think about it that way. But it makes absolutely complete sense. It's just incredible. I was really excited to talk about this today because I was just like, oh my gosh, I've got to shout this from the rooftops, because all along I kept thinking that I was protecting myself and just not wanting to go outside. But the reality of it is I am avoiding things. And so now that I know that, then I can start working towards maybe preventing that. I'm not exactly sure how I'm going to do that, because like I know that I'm avoiding things, but things still upset me. The anxiety is still really high in certain scenarios, and so I'm not quite sure how to get over that hump and to explore this so it will lead to healing. But I will say, though, that because of this epiphany that I've started trying to I've never stopped doing my Be Normal campaign. And what I mean by that is the Be Normal campaign that I started when I started this podcast was trying to take things from my past and move them into my current life, so I have some semblance of who I was before all of this started. And because my anxiety is from work, that actually started in 2020. And so things just have escalated since then. I was initially diagnosed with anxiety. That was in 2020. And then I was eventually diagnosed with depression. And those diagnoses were really close to each other. But then I was diagnosed with PTSD. That was a couple of years later. Then I was diagnosed with agoraphobia. That was the most recent thing. I've also been recently diagnosed with a heart condition that is something that I believe is because of this anxiety that I've been going through. I've been diagnosed with PVC. What PVC stands for premature ventricular contractions that can be caused by emotional stress, anxiety, among other factors. And it's an arrhythmia in the heart, and it feels like it's fluttering. And it does. And I can tell when my anxiety is high that my heart tends to flutter more often. And sometimes I can even feel that in my stomach, like that nervous feeling, which is really what ultimately got me to the doctor back in 2020 was my physical symptoms, not necessarily the feeling of being anxious, because I didn't know what that feeling was. I kind of want to talk just real briefly about this, but it says that quite a lot of people in the population have it. 75% of a 40-hour cardiac monitoring tends to happen. And like I said, it's emotional stress, feeling of the anxiety, anger can trigger PVCs and other arrhythmias. There was a study back in 2012 that talked about this, and a third of the participants had this and had symptoms of anxiety. And it says that stress and anxiety can induce cardiac arrhythmia. Your body experiences stress, your body will release stress hormones like adrenaline and cortisol. And if you remember, 2 weeks ago in the last episode, we talked a lot about cortisol. And so I would really personally be interested in doing a cortisol test, because I think they actually have those. But nonetheless, in the last episode, we talked about fight or flight and trauma response. And so this all kind of it's all together, right? And so I truly think that my heart condition is something that is caused by the anxiety. So anyway, so let's go back. So I've had this kind of increase in symptoms or increase in diagnoses from the anxiety all the way up to agoraphobia now with not going outside. And as I've done that, my world has gotten smaller. And so this past weekend, I actually did a lot of research on this subject because I really wanted to learn more and become knowledgeable for this episode and for myself. But one of the things I found was an episode, and I'll link it below. It was from a channel on YouTube about a woman who was discussing this very thing. And she talks about and let me get the right wording here. She talks about the anxiety cycle. And what that means is, so in a normal world, let's say, you live a safe life. You feel safe, your anxiety is normal levels, you feel safe. You see a threat, you perceive that threat, you conquer that threat, and you then come back to feeling normal. No anxiety, and you're basically safe. You feel safe again. However, with the anxiety loop, you do not come back to feeling safe. So, for example, let's use anxiety as an example. That you perceive the threat, the default mode is safety. So you initially start out feeling safe. You perceive that threat. You have a fear response or a fight response. And you face that threat. And sometimes if you avoid that threat, here, key word here is you avoid the threat. You say you don't fight, then you do not get the opportunity, or your body does not get the opportunity to return to safety, to that safety level. And so because of that, it starts to increase your anxiety. And so that's exactly what happened to me. I was, say, down here as an example when I first started, which was really high anxiety, but let's just say that's where it was initially. And then over the course of the last few years, it started to increase. And now it's to the point where it's so bad that going outside is difficult for me. And I will say there are things that we've talked about in other episodes and even the short videos that I've done, is that I do think that some of that anyway, I don't know if I say a lot, but some of that has to do with where I live. Like, I don't feel safe where I live, and I live alone, and because of where I live in the country, I don't feel safe. And so I really do feel that is part of the problem, and the reason I say that is because where I've lived here now for almost 2 years, and I've not had that problem of not feeling safe until I moved here. And so I don't know if that is more of the anxiety, because my anxiety has been triggered while I've been here because of my work. But I'm also wondering too if that's part of where I live too. Because one of the things that my counselor mentioned was that let's say you eliminate things in your life, or avoid things in this case, like I don't go to work anymore, I'm 100% telework, and I'm avoiding that, then anxiety shows up in other places in your life. So I'm wondering that because I pulled myself out of work and working from home, that now my anxiety is shifted over to not feeling safe with what's going on outside in the world. And that was perfect timing. There's sirens going by. There's a cop. So, good times. Anyway, so something to think about, for me anyways, at least. But back to this cycle. So if your body's not getting through this anxiety loop, and you're not getting yourself back to safety, or your feeling of safety. I'll just read this here. This is, I believe, verbatim for what she said on the video, and I will link it below so she'll get credit. But she says, we are good at thinking about danger and avoidance. This continual thought of a threat keeps us in fear response and is in the present moment. We can find ways to avoid people or places that bother us. We can hide from our fear in general. This brings us short-term relief, which it does, because that's another thing too. Like, for example, when I was going to work, when I was actually going into work 5 days a week, more sirens. When I was going into work 5 days a week, my anxiety was high for sure. But then I reduced my time going into work to only 2 days, and that gave me short-term relief. I felt a sense of relief. Oh goodness, thank goodness I don't have to go in 5 days a week now. And then my anxiety increased more, and now I'm 100% telework. And again, it was a short-term relief for maybe a month or two. I don't know. I've been teleworking now for 5 months. But now my anxiety's high again. And now it's the outside world that I find scary. So I have had those short-term relief after certain decisions have been made, but all of add up to avoidance. So anyway, you get short-term relief, but increase the anxiety because we aren't closing the loop and we're returning to the sense of safety. And so one of the things discussion is called the polyvagal ladder, which I thought was real interesting. And it talks about the increase it talks about I guess it's the relationship between response and the shutdown. And so I'll just go through. So initially we feel safe. And that's true. Back in 2019, I felt safe. I did have anxiety, but I didn't know that. Normal level. It was manageable. It was social. I was engaged with people. I went out and I had friends and I was making connections, living a very normal life. And then my anxiety started to happen and I started to retreat and I became mobilized and ready for action, and I was in my trauma response of fight or flight. And if you remember back to the episode, that for me anyways, at least I'm not always in one of the trauma responses or one of those modes. Depending on the situation, I could be in fight or I could be in freeze mode or a combination, and it's very, very fluid, if you will. And so once you get to that, then there's this, it's called neuroception of life threat, where you become immobilized, shut down, collapsed and trapped. And that's exactly how I feel. I feel trapped. And I don't even feel safe in this house because where I live and things that have happened outside with car break-ins. My car has been broken into twice, once stolen. I've had some weird dude knocking on at midnight. Just various things like that, which that does not make me feel safe whatsoever. So one of the things that my counselor and I are thinking about requesting is the possibility to move to a better place to where I feel able. And quite sure what to do with that yet, because I moved down here for a reason. I moved out to this part of the country for a reason. I was planning on spending the last 7-8 years of my career out here, and because of where I'm at, there's a ton of abilities for positions. Maybe not necessarily right now, but just in general, let's say things were normal. And I figured I would come out here, I would do my job, and I would learn the ropes of a new organization, and then I make a difference. Then I would move on to something else and just really knock it out of the park, and then retire and ride off into the sunset. And a lot of things have happened over the last year that has completely derailed my career. Like, I had actually planned on going back to school. I got my master's degree at the end of 2024. I had planned on going back to school and getting another advanced degree because I was wanting to use that in the last 3 or 4 years of my career. And all of that has been derailed. And I really have no direction career. Part of me thinks, well, maybe I should stay here and stick it out and try and get through the anxiety and live out my dream of the last portion of my career. But then I am protective of my mental health. I'm thinking maybe that's exactly what I should do. Maybe I should protect my mental health and just go off to a place in the country where I feel more secure and more safe, and then just do my career in the position that I'm in. I don't know. It's overwhelming to even think about. But anyway, back to this. And so she goes on to say here, and I'll say, you never want to feel that way. You never want to feel that way again, so you avoid those situations, which is so freaking true. That's why I'm not in relationships anymore. I'm avoiding relationships. Maybe I am avoiding relationships. But I really just don't want a relationship either. I really enjoy being alone. I've lived alone and I like it. I don't really want a relationship. But anyway, I guess you can also say that's avoiding in the sense that I don't want my heart broken either. Anyway, so you get short-term relief by avoiding. When we avoid something and survive by avoiding, it upregulates our anxiety. Then you avoid more places, so you can't go out to a lot of places that you once enjoyed, but at least you don't feel so much anxiety. Then the anxiety increases, and the more you tend to avoid, pretty soon you aren't leaving the house, which is exactly true. I'm not leaving the house. Here's another example. So today I was supposed to meet with a psychiatrist. And this appointment's been on the books for, I don't know, probably a month now. And earlier this week, I was really on board with going to this appointment. I was like, yeah, I'm gonna get up, I'm gonna shower, I'm gonna get dressed, and I'm gonna go out, and I'm gonna go to this appointment. And the closer and closer it got, I spent all day yesterday just anxious, like nauseous, and just really anxious. And shockingly, the office called me late last night. I say late, it was like 5:45, and called me late last night and work to fill out. I was like, oh, okay. In that conversation, they also offered the option for me to actually do a telehealth appointment, because initially they said that I had to go into the office to have this appointment. And so I was thrilled. Again, there's that short-term relief. I was thrilled that I didn't have to get up today and go do that. And I will say this too, we had really crappy weather here today. It was snowing, and so I was really thankful I didn't have to get out into it. But nonetheless, again, I avoided that situation. And the cycle just continues to spiral. The next option that I have going out is tomorrow night. A friend and I are going to see a concert, and it's a band I've never seen. It's a band that I want to see. It's my list to go see, and here I am trying to get myself ready to go. And yesterday and today I'm more nervous about it, but we've talked about it, and we're going. So we're gonna go. So anyway, here's another example of things that in the modern world, you read or hear the news, you hear that's happening, you become tense and anxious, but there's no physical action to take, so you're immobilized. Basically, maybe sitting on the couch or laying in bed, and you're just scrolling. And you continue to scroll through the phone while laying still, and the anxiety loop is never closed because you're scrolling, and you're distracted and you're avoiding it. So things can be to make you anxious. And I love this analogy because my career coach has talked about this. You're picking up more bricks, or rocks, I'm sorry. He says bricks. You're picking up more rocks and putting them in your backpack, and you're carrying it around. Our nervous system gets stuck in chronic stress, which is true. Work is a cognitive or social challenge and not a physical task. Now the challenge of a modern world and email and drama with coworkers, these are less physical opportunities to solve the problems. So she has some solutions, and we're going to talk a little bit more about this in a little bit, but her solutions are learn how your nervous system soothes it. And that's one thing that I have to do. Today, so I love snow, and it snowed here today. And one thing I did today that I haven't done in a really long time, like 2 years, is I actually opened the front door, and watched it snow, which to me is very soothing. And so I need to find things like that to do. And this whole epiphany of avoiding things, I have started to go and sign up for things to do. I'm nervous about it, but I did sign up for a workout class, which means I actually have to leave the house and go to a workout class. I've signed up to be a part of a choir, and that starts in a month. Very nervous about that. I haven't sang in a choir in since the 90s. Or as some people are saying these days, the late 1900s. Thank you for making me feel old. So things like that. I'm trying to live normal life, even though my anxiety is through the roof. Anyway, next here she says, limit your exposure to media and toxic social media. And that's actually something too that I want to do. So I don't like to read necessarily, but the things that I like to do or want to do and considering doing, is going out and buying a few books, real books. None of this things I don't want to have it on my device, and read before I go to bed. Because right now I scroll before I go to bed. And so I'm considering that. So I could go to a bookstore and buy books. And then do more physical tasks. Like I said, I've signed up to do a workout class. I'm trying to get out and walk more. Like I promised my counselor I would get out and walk. So far I've done that this week. I've been taking my dog a short walk in the morning, which she loves, because up until this past week we hadn't been going out a lot, and she was even getting depressed. My poor girl was even getting depressed because she wouldn't even me when I would come down and walk through the family room when she was down there. She would just not even lift her head, so she was getting ready to get out of the house. And so we've been doing really short walks. Ability right now, I really am starting from nothing, and so our walks are really hoping to increase that by going this workout class after. But anyway, she says every time you distract yourself from what you're feeling, you send a message to your brain that feeling is dangerous and you can't deal with it. When it's danger, the anxiety. I love that statement because it does get louder. What is the alternate to avoidance? Sitting down, allowing your anxiety to be there, and choosing how many hours you're going to study as an example. And here's the thing, this is the confusion with the avoidance, is I was going into work every day for several that I was going in 2 days a week. We were allowed to telework 2 days a week, and then we were required to go in every day. And I was going in every day, and my anxiety was through the freaking roof. It the F out. And why I tried to go back to the 2 days a week. But I was going in every day, so I wasn't avoiding my anxiety then. And it got worse to the point where I was like, I've got to do 2 days a week. Because what would happen is I would go into work every day. My anxiety was through the roof. It made for a very long week. And then Saturday would come around, and I would just be knocked out. I would be so tired from the week that I would basically spend all day Saturday in bed, recovering from the week. And really then that would give me one day on the weekend to kind of do anything. I mean, I really wasn't going out and doing anything, but it would give me like one day, and that's just enough to really spend in your recovery. How do I resolve my feelings if it's hard? That's my question. So really ultimately for me, I'm not sure how I'm going to get over this hump, but at least now I've identified the problem and I can move forward. So let's talk more about this anxiety stuff. Is really important with respect to the anxiety and avoidance. So this article here, this is from National Center for PTSD. And so PTSD is one of the things that I am diagnosed with. Anxiety and depression and PTSD are all mixed together. So something will trigger me at work and my PTSD will be triggered, which then leads to the anxiety, which then leads to depression. And so because of that, I talk about how all of this fits together. What are the different types of avoidance? And this says that there are 2 different types. And emotional avoidance is one of them, when a person avoids thoughts or feelings about a traumatic event. That this type of avoidance is internal to the person, others around what you're avoiding and why. And then this is called avoiding reminders, like places, people, sounds, or smells of a trauma is called behavioral avoidance. And an example that they give is a combat veteran may stop watching the news or using social media because the stories and posts about the war or current events. And then it says survivors might go out of their way to stay away from the scene of their attack or places that remind them of their assault. And so it says, what are the consequences of avoidance? And we just talked about this, but I'll go ahead and read this paragraph. It says, if you're going through a trauma, you may have heard advice like, just try not to think about it, time heals all wounds, which that one drives me crazy. But if you go out of your way to avoid these thoughts, feelings, or reminders related to a traumatic event, your symptoms may get worse. Using avoidance as your main way of coping with traumatic memories can make PTSD symptoms worse and make it harder to move on. Very. All right, so let's move on to the next episode. Let's move on to the next article here. And this one was really interesting. So this one is from the Tampa Bay Center for Relational Psychology. And the article title is Understanding Avoidance in Trauma and the Role of Emotion-Focused Therapy. And so I'm guessing, just based on what we just talked about, that this has to do with somebody who is using emotional avoidance, which I think I may do a little more so to the avoiding reminders. Probably a combination of the two. But so this says, what is avoidance? Avoidance is a psychological term that describes the act of steering clear distressing situations, emotions, or thoughts. In the context of trauma and PTSD, avoidance can manifest in many ways. For example, avoid crowds, which I take public transportation to work, and I actually get into work really early, between like 6 and 6:30, because I've not been diagnosed with social anxiety, but I try to avoid having to interact, and at that hour there's not on the train, and it makes me feel less anxious because of that. And same for the afternoon. It's a little bit busier in the afternoon, but there's less people on the train than there is in the morning, if I were to go later in the evening or afternoon. So the person around are getting too close in relationships, yes, after experiencing a traumatic event, or they might suppress thoughts or feelings related to the trauma. Avoidance can provide temporary relief from distressing symptoms, creating a cycle that can be challenging to break. Very true. The immediate relief of distress reinforces the avoidance behavior, making it more likely to occur in the future. Very true. How does avoidance reinforce trauma symptoms? When a person consistently avoids trauma reminders, they miss out on opportunities to process the traumatic event and to challenge or change their reactions to it. Avoidance keeps the person stuck in their fear, which that's true. I fear everything out there now, as they have never had a chance to learn that they can handle the distress and that not every reminder of the trauma is as dangerous as it may seem. This can lead to a vicious cycle where the person continues to avoid reminders of the trauma, reinforcing their fear and maintaining their trauma symptoms. The avoidance behavior can also to other areas in their life, which we just talked about. My anxiety really is associated with work, but now I'm staying at home because the outside world is scary, which has not happened to me before. So maybe it is to trickle over into other things in my life. The avoidance behavior can also spread to other parts of life, leading to a decrease in quality of life and relationships and an increase in feelings of anxiety, isolation, and shame. So true. So true. And it goes on here to talk about emotion therapy, and we'll just quickly talk about that. Emotion therapy, a path through avoidance, offers a way out of this cycle to search that our emotions are not inherently bad or harmful. There are normal responses to our experiences, including traumatic ones. EFT is a therapy that values emotions as important data, sees emotional change as central to lasting change, and promotes awareness. In EFT, the therapy helps a person work through emotions that they may have previously felt too uncomfortable or dangerous and shameful to feel. So this is real interesting. My psychiatrist recommended today that I do cognitive behavioral therapy, and he's going to set me up with somebody who specializes in that, because he feels that my anxiety, because of the anxiety and depression, that's the best that year at some point. So next up, let's talk about, we did talk a little bit about kind of things that we can do, and so this is another call in Psychology Today. And it just talks, I'm not going to read through these because I'll link it below, but it just gives you ideas on how of breaking free of negative loops. And one here is challenge negative thoughts and self-limiting beliefs, which that's why I started doing things. Granted, it's only around the house and trying to get back out and walking the dog, but you know what? Baby steps. Not everything is going to happen at once, and I don't want to do everything at once because I don't want to overwhelm myself. So anyway, so number here is take action to address recurring issues and keep you up at night. That means just action is the enemy of anxiety. Addressing issues within your control where you can make changes that alleviate your worries will chip away at your worry loop as you create positive changes. And that's what I'm trying. Limit your exposure to distressing news cycles. So I may try to buy some books this weekend. I would like to get back into reading, I think. It was fun. I have a learning disability. Reading's not fun for me, and I'm really slow at it. But several years ago, I read 4 books, which is a lot for me. And it took me several months. Most people can read a book in like a day. I cannot. It takes me weeks. And I really enjoyed it because the books that I chose were really good. I couldn't tell you what those books are now, but they were really good. So I thought maybe find another book or 2 to read. And next on this says consider practical approaches to managing anxiety. Brain dumping, for example, is a way to download your worries, fears, and concerns at the end of the day. Putting your worries to paper allows you to get those worries out of your head and before bedtime. I think that's a lot of the reasons why people journal in there for a while, and I just didn't like it. But I did transition over to recordings, and I've stopped doing that. So maybe I should try and do that again. But I will say that this podcast in general has allowed me to express my concerns and that are happening. I do shorter videos during the week. I do week check-in Wednesdays where I check in with everybody, all 16 of you out there, and see if we're all doing okay. So that right there has really helped with this. I want to be able to heal, but I also want to be able to provide folks out there with opportunities to learn, so maybe we can heal through this together. And that was really the goal for this podcast. Is I am sick and tired, and I really feel that way. And I'm hoping that this journey continues and that I can heal. And after my appointment this morning, my psychiatrist said he's going to try and help me get through this. And he said that I may never be back who I was, which I don't expect that. I will never be who I was. Maybe I can go back and try to at least be some form of who I was and I can actually get outside. Next up here, it talks about health, and this talks about cognitive behavioral therapy. And, the other one here is exposure therapy. I'm going to try that, the cognitive behavioral therapy. I think that will be really interesting. I do apologize for this recording. This is now my 3rd recording because I have had a hard time getting my computer to understand the recording. I mean that it keeps lagging, and the recording and the voice and the video are not. And so I'm trying to do something new, but this will be audio or video. Normally I put things, and I'm trying something new with that to see if that helps. So I apologize for looking down and reading, but I'm hoping that ultimately what needs to happen is I just need to get a new laptop. This one doesn't have the memory to do big recordings like this. But anyway, so I want to thank you for joining us today. I hope that this was a wonderful learning experience for you as it was for me. Like I said at the beginning of this episode, this has been a huge epiphany to me, and I had no idea that I was avoiding things, and I'm thrilled that I have finally figured this out. And now that I know, I'm hoping there are steps that I can take for preventing myself avoiding, as some maybe you could say. But I'm really hoping that in the future that this will lead me down the path of healing now that I know what the problem is. So I want to thank you for joining me today, and I hope you have a wonderful week. And again, thank you for joining us for the Mental Health Hope You're Not Alone podcast. Well, thanks. So one of the other things I want to talk about real quick is, like I said, this whole last couple weeks have just been a true epiphany about all of this anxiety and avoidance and everything. And I was watching a clip from Drew Barrymore show. I don't watch her show really, but I see her clips on YouTube. And there was a clip that she did the other day, and she was talking with somebody she was interviewing. I guess this person had done a movie, and they were talking about some of Drew's past. And apparently Drew at one point in her life was in a facility for a couple years. Her mom didn't know what to do with her, and so she put her in a facility. And I guess every Wednesday the group of people that were staying at this facility they'd get together and talk, and they would bring people, their family or friends or whatever from the outside, and they would talk about what it is that they were in for. It sounds like they're in prison. What they were there for, and it was a really emotional thing. And she said they sat around in a circle, and she said it was the most craziest thing, but it was also the most coolest thing that she'd experienced while she was there. And in that conversation, she said a bunch of things that, again, really helped with this epiphany. And so I just want to say a few things, and I'll link the 2 or 3 minute video that she said below so you can see it. But it just really was along the lines that we were talking about here. And she says, and so one of the things that I was questioning with either my counselor or career coach was, am I afraid to change my life because I'm too scared? And so one of the things that was said, changing my life will occur when I feel like I'm worth it and I respect myself. And I'm not sure if I do respect myself right now. So that's one thing to think about. But anyway, so Drew had mentioned that she feels, and so this was a conversation between the two of them, and what they said in that conversation. So it's a little bit of both. But Drew said, tears and laughter are twins, and so is grief and love, and they do everything that they can to escape from it, which I thought, yeah. And then also, too, that pain and pleasure are twins. I've never heard it described that way, but it really does seem to be that way. And then she goes on to say, if we numb ourselves because we're so afraid to feel the tension and the pain of grief, we also numb ourselves from the joy and pleasure of love. How more perfect could that be with respect to this topic? Because am I denying myself joy and love because I've been avoiding things? Probably. So, again, I have to figure out how to get there. And I'm not quite sure how that's going to happen. But I'm going to continue working on this journey, and you're going to come along with me. If today's episode of Real Stories, Real Struggles